Hello, welcome back to my channel if you're new here. My name is Mary and today's video is going to be my mid-month wrap-up for the month of December. So, did you break in? Hi! Murphy decided to come say hello. I tried to lock the door, but we have like a hook and eye lock and apparently he busted right through it. So, good job, baby. Hello. Hi. Yes, I know. Can you go lay down? Can you go lay down? You can lay down right here if you want. Oh my goodness. Somebody needs attention. In the month of December so far, I'm really excited. I've read 15 books and it's December 16th right now, which is kind of wild. I guess I finished 15 books. I finished some things from my November TBR at the very beginning of the month, and then I've just been sort of reading a lot, I guess, for lack of a better word. So I'm just gonna go through the things. I'm doing this the way I normally do, where I'm going through the books in the order in which I enjoyed them. So this is like a rough order for the books that I read at the first half of the month of December. So I'm pretty excited with my reading progress so far. And a lot of these I've read as like quick audiobooks just in a day, including the first one that I'm going to talk about, which is Misconduct by Penelope Douglas. This is a romance novel. So Penelope Douglas writes like semi-smutty romance novels. I don't read a ton of like smut or romance that like leans that heavily into smut, but this is my third Penelope Douglas book and it is my least favorite of the ones that I've read. I also didn't love Birthday Girl, which I know some people really like. I think it's just certain things work for me and other things don't. This book is about a woman in New Orleans who has just graduated grad school and is going to be a teacher at this like private school. And she has a one-off encounter with a guy who she doesn't know his name, but he's like aggressive, like weirdly sexually aggressive towards her in this like when he meets her. And it just gave me the ick right away. I really didn't like that. But then it turns out that he is the parent of one of her students and he's also like a local politician, I guess. So he's older. I think he's in his like late 30s and she's like 24 or something. So they have a little bit of an age gap thing going, and the taboo bit is that she's the teacher of his son, which frankly I didn't think was that taboo, but maybe other people disagree with me. I know that like you probably shouldn't date students, but all I could think about was like Max and Lorelai Gilmore from Gilmore Girls, and I feel like that wasn't really, there wasn't an issue with that, and it was like a similar situation, except for they're the same age, so I guess that's the difference. Ultimately, this book just didn't work for me. I do like the way that Penelope Douglas writes her smut scenes, like I think they're fine, but like the way that the male character, whose name I can't remember now, and I don't really care to look it up, the way that he interacted with the female protagonist was just so icky. The development between like of the teenager happened completely off page. So like one scene he is just being a shithead to his teacher and he really hates her, and the next scene suddenly he's like, she's my favorite teacher. It was weird, okay? So yeah, unfortunately that one just didn't really work for me. It was fine for what it was, but like I just think Penelope Douglas perhaps is not an author for me. The next book I want to talk about is another one that really disappointed me. I finished A Winter's Promise by Christelle Dabos. So I don't know, she's French. And this is a YA fantasy that is translated from the French. Part of my problem with this was like the pacing of it. And then also I wanted more world building than we really got. The premise of this book is that the world a long time ago was like broken up into different island planets, I guess. And our main character lives on this one island planet and she gets taken to another island planet because she's promised to marry someone important there. And then there's like a good bit of political intrigue. It's called The Pole, I think is the planet she ends up going to. And there's a good bit of political intrigue with The Pole because there's things happening and like assassins are trying to do things. And I don't know how to describe this book because like, again, I just didn't really get it, I guess. And I felt like it went really slow. And then I kept getting confused on which characters were which and who was supposed to be good and who was supposed to be bad. This is a quartet, I believe. And I don't know at this point if I'm going to continue in it because I just didn't really care for the first one. So if you have read this series, let me know what you thought of it. Let me know if like you think I should continue, or like if the other books are paced differently or you liked them more than the first book, or if they're all the same as the first one, I probably won't read it because it's just not really for me, if that makes sense. But I did finish that. And again, I've given both these books that I've talked about so far 3 stars. So nothing got below a 3-star this month, but all of these, the first 3 that I'm talking about, actually got 2.5 stars. I just rounded them up. Speaking of 2.5 stars, How Much of These Hills is Gold by C. Pam Zhang. is a book that I read. I just finished this one, like literally right before filming this. This is a take on a Western. So it's set in California during the gold rush, or just before the gold rush, or just after the gold rush, something like that. And we're following a family of Chinese immigrants to America. And you learn different things about them, but the premise at the beginning of the book, the father of this, the patriarch of this family died. The mother is already dead and gone. Like, she's been gone for a while. And you're following these two kids, Sam and Lucy. And Sam has been dressing as a boy and like passing as a boy. And I believe that he's probably like would identify as a boy. Like, he's completely living as a boy. And Lucy is living as a girl, obviously, but they're siblings. And you're mostly following from Lucy's point of view. So you're following them as they like have to leave where their dad has died. I liked parts of this, but the storytelling is a little out of order. So at a certain point, we go back into the past and see Lucy and Sam's childhood. And then we get the perspective of their father. And he sort of tells part of his story for like a third of the book, which I thought was really boring, frankly. And then you get like a 5 years after you were introduced to the story and what's going on with Lucy and Sam then, if that makes sense. This is another one of those books where like the writing style just didn't really work for me. It was very like flowery literary fiction type writing, which is fine, but I've talked about this before. I don't love poetry, and parts of it felt like it was trying to be poetry, and that just really wasn't my thing. So I almost DNF'd this book because I just didn't get it at parts, and I thought it was kind of boring. I'm glad I finished it, but I think I wouldn't recommend this to everybody. I feel like I would only recommend this to certain people. What I really liked about this book is that I've never read a book with this type of perspective. Like, I've never read a historical fiction set around this time following Chinese immigrants. I thought that was a really interesting take, and I want to read more things that are different than the like typical historical fictions that you see. So for that, I thought it was really good, but the execution just didn't work for me. It just isn't written in a way that I personally enjoy. Speaking of poetry, we're moving on to, this is another 3-star. I read The Black Flamingo by Nin Atta, which I listened to in an afternoon. It did not take me very long. This book was fine. It's poetry. It's about this guy who is mixed and queer, and he lives in England. And it's just about him like coming of age, coming out, and then going to college and becoming this drag queen called the Black Flamingo. Personally, I just like didn't really care for it. I know a lot of people really love this book. And so I think maybe if you're younger than me and you are more interested in poetry, I think that combination might make you like this more. It is young adult. I will say there are like adult themes. Like, it's more like young adult, new adult, because you're like following him from elementary school. Like, the first poem is about him really wanting a Barbie when he's a little kid, and his mom didn't get it for him, and then she ended up giving it to him for Christmas because he really wanted this Barbie. So I don't know. I thought this was fine. I just don't think I'm the right audience for it. And I don't love poetry, which I've talked about before. So I think I might need to like clear all the poetry off my TBR because I don't really think I'm gonna like it. But I do have another poetry thing to talk about in a second that I liked more. And then my last 3-star that I want to talk about is Dark Lover by J.R. Ward, which is the first book in the Black Dagger Brotherhood series, which there's like 20-something books in this series. I am planning on continuing in it at this point. But this book follows how do I describe this? So there's vampires, and then there are lessers, and lessers are like soulless humans who are trying to hunt and kill the vampires. And there's this big war between the lessers and the vampires. And at the beginning of this book, a guy in the Black Dagger Brotherhood, Darius, dies. But before he dies, he tries to convince, what is his name? Wrath? Yes, Wrath. He tells Wrath that he has this half human, half vampire daughter who's about to go through the change, and he needs someone to take care of her. And when you're going through the change, you need to drink vampire blood. That's how vampires get their energy, is they drink the blood of other vampires in this world. They can drink the blood of humans, but it's not as satisfying for them for some reason. I don't really know. So Wrath and this human girl, who she's like a journalist or whatever, he has to like convince her that she's half vampire and like enter her into this world. And they have a romance between them. I will say their romance happens way too fast. It like almost immediately they meet and they're like, oh my God, we have to have sex. And that was a little strange for me. There was no like pining or whatever. There sort of is pining after the fact where they're like not sure if they want to be with the other one, and neither of them wants to get their hopes up that they could be in a relationship, but also they're like confused about how they feel. So I did like this book, but I don't think I didn't love it. So I'm hoping as the series goes on, I'm excited because Black Dagger Brotherhood is this like group of elite warriors in the vampire race. And I'm excited to see the love story of the other guys, basically. But I don't know if any of these books are going to be like, wow, I loved it, 5 stars. But I am enjoying it, you know? First 4-star I want to talk about is Starling House by Alix E. Harrow. I actually thought I gave this 3 stars. That's why I put it at the bottom of this. This book is set in this town in Eden, Kentucky. And there's this old house there that's been there forever that's called the Starling House. And there's all sorts of rumors about the people who live in the Starling House. And our main character, whose name I don't remember, Opal is like 26, and she's the sole caretaker of her brother since her mom died in a car accident. And so her brother's in high school, and she's trying to get him out of Eden, Kentucky, because it's basically this like shitty town that, I don't know, there's like no opportunity there basically. And at the beginning of the book, she feels called to Starling House. She's just having these dreams about it. And she walks by one day and she sees the guy who owns Starling House, or is like the heir to Starling House, the ward of Starling House, if you will. And she just feels really called to this house. And then he ends up, for some reason, hiring her to clean the house. I don't remember why he does that, but as you get more invested in the story, you learn more about like what's going on with the house. And there's like, it's a gothic fantasy. So the house is very much its own character. I really liked the atmosphere in this book. I don't love Alix E. Harrow's writing style, so I find it kind of hard to follow. This is my second book by her that I've read. And I know I read the 10,000 Doors of January, which I really was expecting to love, and I just didn't like it that much. So I'm really hoping to read The Once and Future Witches, and then if I don't like that book, I'll just probably say she's not an author for me. Maybe I should just say that anyways, but like I didn't dislike this book. It just isn't my favorite. The writing was my least favorite thing about it. Her concepts are good, I just don't love the way that she writes things. That's how I felt about this one. I did enjoy it. I had a good time reading it, and I like the twists that happened. I feel like certain parts of it dragged and certain parts of it were rushed through to where I didn't really, like I would get lost at parts because things would happen so fast. And then other parts I was like, okay, I get it, move on. And I know this is a really well-loved book, and it was nominated this year for the Goodreads Choice Awards for Best Fantasy. So there you go. The next book I want to talk about is Social Creature by Tara Isabella Burton. Okay, this book is, how do I describe it? It's about this woman who lives in New York. She's 29 years old, and she is like trying to be a writer, but she hasn't been published. She hasn't been submitting any articles. She's been like working like 6 different jobs. I think she's like a barista, she's a bartender, and she's like tutors people for the SAT, and she just has odd jobs. And one day she ends up meeting this young like socialite basically, and the socialite kind of takes her under her wing, and they start like having this really intense toxic friendship, and then things get really crazy as it goes along. I've heard that this is very similar to a movie that I haven't seen, and the movie is mentioned in the blurb of this, but several of the reviews talk about how it's basically the same as the movie. So I haven't seen that movie, so it didn't bother me. I actually really enjoyed the take on toxic friendship because I feel like it was so accurate, the way like the more wrapped up into something you get, like you can't get out of it. Like they were just stuck in this web. Just the elements of like fear of losing your friend, but also fear of losing like your social standing and the benefits you get from this friendship. It was really interesting. I'm really glad that I read this book. I didn't love it, but I thought it was a really good book. And it's definitely something that I'm gonna like think about, because it just like, it gets pretty dark, which I wasn't really anticipating. I was really glad that I read that book. I don't remember why I put it on my TBR, but I did, and I really enjoyed it. Next, I'm gonna talk about a book that I have been trying to read all year, and I finally finished. My library finally got an audiobook of South to America by Imani, which means I was able to listen to it instead of physically reading it, which means I got it done in like 2 days. So I finished this book. This is a nonfiction book by Imani. She has a PhD from Princeton. I believe she's a professor there, but don't quote me on that. And she writes books from time to time, apparently. So she wrote this one, and it's kind of like a family history of herself, but also like a love letter to the southern United States. She was born in Alabama, and that's where like her people are from. But she grew up in Michigan, maybe? or the Northeast. I don't remember exactly where I know she talks about Detroit at one point, but I don't remember if she said she lived there. But this book basically is about her going through the South and telling the stories that she feels like the northern half of America kind of looks down on the South, but she talks about like all the great cultural things that the South has done, also some like not great things that the South has done, and specifically she talks about the role of like Black Americans in American culture and how so much of that comes from the South. And I just thought it was a really interesting take. Listening as an audiobook was a lot easier for me to get through this one, but I did really enjoy it, and I am really glad that I read it. Next, I'm going to talk about the other poetry collection that I read this month, and that is White God is a Woman by Nin Andrews. I really, really enjoyed this poetry collection. I don't think I would say that I loved it, but it's the best poetry collection that I've read maybe ever, or at least in a long time. And this is primarily set on this island, and on the island, basically gender roles are reversed. So women have all the positions of power. It's kind of like if you saw the movie Barbie, except it's not egalitarian. It's literally like our world, but if everything was swapped. And so parts of it were really funny because it was talking about like, I don't know, it would make comments. Like if you've ever heard the comment of like, women leaders aren't good because they're too emotional, it basically did that, but like reversed it for the gender stereotypes of men, which I just thought it was a really interesting like satirical take, I guess. The poetry, like the way it was written, was my least favorite thing about it, frankly, because I liked all the ideas. And there's this one thing about how like the boys on this island, you're following this one particular boy and you're following him and seeing how like hard his life is because of the way that society is structured. And so I thought that was a really interesting way to do it too, because society is structured the opposite in real life. So it was just very interesting to read the like stark contrast between like the world that we think we live in and then like how things actually are. And I think it's worth the read if you are in the mood. It's very short. I read it again in an afternoon. I just scrolled through my phone and read it. I think if you are interested in maybe trying poetry and you like nonfiction and fiction that leans into like satire and questioning societal standards, I think you would like this one. The last 4-star that I'm going to talk about is Babel by RF Kuang. And this, I'm sure you know what it's about, but it is a historical fantasy where the premise is that in this world, there's this thing called silver working. And what you do is you carve a word and a translation of that word into a bar of silver. And the magic that comes from it is from the difference between those words. Because when you translate things, you lose part of their meaning. And so that's where things get their power. It's super interesting. We're following this character, Robin, who was born in Canton in China. And pretty much his whole life, he's had this like English caretaker who is there with him, and she's taught him English alongside him learning Mandarin and Cantonese. And then he hits a certain age where he gets swept up and taken to England to further his education. And he basically gets told by his patron that he's going to be going to Oxford to their school of translation in Babel. And that is going to like be his life. Like he's going to learn silver working. So he has a lot of internal conflict with like, he's working for the crown, and England, especially at this time, but still kind of now, is like a cultural powerhouse, has been going to other nations, killing the people and taking their stuff. And like, he's wondering if he wants to help the empire with this anymore. There's a secret society called Hermes that is trying to take Babel down. And it's just all about the like really internal conflict that Robin goes through. The reason I didn't give this book 5 stars, there's a couple reasons. I felt like this book could have been a series or could have been handled differently to make it not feel as rushed as I felt like it felt. I don't know if other people agree with me, but I do feel like there was a little bit of telling and not showing in this book, specifically with like Robin's character development. The path that he goes on, I feel like there were too many time skips for it to really be impactful and feel super realistic. And I also felt like I think RF Kuang kind of took for granted that the reader would buy into the found family element of this book. And I wish that that had been expanded upon a little bit more as well. But ultimately, not a bad book at all. I highly recommend if you have not read it. It was super interesting. I really liked it. It was a Really cool concept, really cool magic system. And now we're on to my 5 stars. So the first 5-star I'm going to talk about is You Could Make This Place Beautiful by Maggie Smith. Not that Maggie Smith. I also thought it was that Maggie Smith when I picked it up, but no, it is an American poet. So this is another one that's kind of poetic, but I didn't feel, this is a memoir. And so it's not like fully poems, if that makes sense. It's not poems at all, really. I think there are some snippets of poems in here, but it's not like a poetry collection. This book is primarily about Maggie Smith's divorce. And she talks a lot about how her life changed when her husband left her and he had an affair and like all this stuff that happened, and how she had to like pick up the pieces of her life and move on. So it is very much about a relationship falling apart. So I'm kind of surprised that I liked it as much as I did, but this book made me cry. It made me laugh. I really enjoyed reading her perspective. I thought it was a very fresh take on just like life in general. And I don't even think she's middle-aged, but she's probably like in her 40s, but like having to start over at that point in your life. I thought it was just a really like impactful, beautiful read, and I'm really, really glad that I read it. This was nominated for Best Memoir, I think, for the Goodreads Choice Award. It did not win. I don't even think it made it past the first round, but that's why I read it. Next 5-star that I want to talk about actually kind of surprised me. Silver Nitrate by, God, what is her name? Silvia Moreno Garcia. This book is set in Mexico City, and it follows primarily one main character, but it's this woman whose name I'm not going to remember. Montserrat. Her name's Montserrat. She lives in Mexico City. She is a like sound engineer for film companies. I want to say this is set in like the 80s or the 90s. And so she does sound engineering, and she's really good friends with this guy who used to be like a teen heartthrob in telenovelas. And he got into a car accident when he was younger, and he has scars all over his face now. So now he mostly does voice acting. But basically they meet, he ends up moving into a new building. So they meet this like old school director that they both has like cult classic films that they both were obsessed with. And that guy's like honestly flattered. And he says, well, I have this one film that I was working on that never got finished. Will you guys help me finish it? And then it ends up being like magical somehow. I don't really want to spoil it because I don't know exactly what is a spoiler, but this book was so good. And I like was really surprised at how much that I loved it. It was very like noir style. If you like noirs, you might like this a lot. I think I do like noirs, but I don't know. I haven't read that many like actual noir books, but the ones that I've read that are like leaning noir, I'm like, oh yeah, I like that. I like the vibe of that. I also like, I really liked the setting. I really liked Montserrat as a character. I honestly really liked her friend as a character too. I did think parts of the plot were convenient, but ultimately I enjoyed it. I had a really good time reading this, and I thought it was like a really interesting concept that I haven't seen done before. So maybe I just don't read enough of this type of book, and you have seen this done a million times, but for me it felt very unique, so I was really pleased with that. Next I'm going to talk about another nonfiction that I read called Disfigured, On Fairy Tales, Disability, and Making Space by Amanda Leduc. And this book is pretty much exactly what it talks about. I was recommended this book a long time ago, I think, by Jen Campbell. She didn't personally recommend it to me, but I'll link her below. She's an author and a booktuber. She is disabled as well. So this book is about how fairy tales use disabilities, and it's not like a be-all end-all, but it's kind of like Amanda Leduc's thoughts on this. And she also interviews other prominent disabled people talking about like how they felt about fairy tales and like if they feel like certain representations of disabilities are a problem. She talks a lot about how like, I don't know, like being disabled or disfigured is like what makes someone a villain a lot of the times. And like it's your easy way to tell if someone is going to be a villain in the story is if they have a disability. So she talks about that, and I've heard this conversation happening before, but I never had like, I've never read something that was like directly about that, and it really did make me like rethink a lot of things that I think about when I think about like Disney movies, grim fairy tales, all of that, and how for so long the take that disability is automatically like a bad thing or an evil thing, and the only way for you to have a happy ending is to get rid of your disability at the end, is a very interesting one to me. But this is a great book. Again, she even mentions in her author's note that she's not like the be-all end-all opinion on this. She just brought forth a lot of thoughts that I had never considered before, so I was really glad that I read that. We're down to my last 2 books. First, I want to talk about The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chokshi. This was also nominated for Best Fantasy on the Goodreads Choice Award this year. I absolutely loved this book. And again, it's another book about toxic friendship. It's another gothic fantasy. Okay. So the book starts with the bridegroom, whose name we never learned, which is I thought it was a fun inversion of the trope of like Rebecca, where we never learn the main character's name in that book. Same thing here. We never learn this guy's name. They just call him the bridegroom. He meets, not gonna remember her name, Indigo? Yes. He meets Indigo and they fall in love. They have this fairy tale thing. He's trying to research a grimoire for his like PhD thesis or something about fairy tales. And she is kind of like a fairy tale. She's very manic pixie dream girl. They fall in love, they get married, and she has a rule that like he can't look into her past. That's the only real rule. And they live for a while very happily. And then she gets called back to her childhood home in the Pacific Northwest, which basically because her great aunt who raised her as a child is dying. And so she has to go back to her childhood home. We get this interspersed with stories of her as a kid and her friend Azure. And Azure lived on the poor side of town, but like really became bonded to Indigo. They became like best friends, and they truly believed that they were going to grow up, turn into fairies, and like leave the world behind and go into this like other world, which they visit sometimes. And it was really, I don't know, this book was like such a spectacular imagining. I did have a hard time with parts of it because it was like they truly believed that they were special, that the Fae wanted them, that the Fae was real. And it's like the whole book is kind of unclear on whether magical things are actually happening or not, which I know I said recently in like a tropes I hate video that I don't like it when things are maybe paranormal, maybe not. But I guess because this wasn't like the house was haunted, this was like maybe there is a magical world that they can find, maybe there isn't. Maybe that's why it worked for me. I don't know, but I really, really enjoyed this book. I liked it so much better than Starling House, which kind of surprises me because based on the premise, it doesn't sound like I would like it as much, but I just found the writing style so beautiful, and I loved the toxic friendship thing in here. I didn't realize I'd read 2 toxic friendship books this month, but apparently I like those. But yeah, I had a really good time reading this one. Then last but certainly not least, my favorite book of the month so far, of the first 2 weeks of the month, is a book that I've been reading off and on since September, okay? And that is The English Patient by Michael Ondaatje, okay? And this is set just post-World War II, and it's in a villa in Italy. And so when the book starts, there's a man who has been burned in a plane accident, and he's still saying this villa was turned into a hospital during the war. Everyone is leaving the villa except for there's this one nurse named Hannah who's Canadian, and she's like, I'm gonna stay because this patient can't be moved. I'll stay, I'll look after him. And then we get 2 other characters who come and join them. One is a guy named Kip, who is Indian, but he was trained to be a person who takes apart bombs. I don't remember what it's called in England. And so he was sent to Italy to do this. And so that's his job. We also have the character of, I'm not gonna remember his name now. Caravaggio. That's his name. I don't remember his first name, but his last name is Caravaggio. And he was friends with Hannah's father in Canada. So she knew him. He's a thief. Okay? And so the premise of the book is that you get these 4 strangers' stories told to you like one at a time. And the whole time they're trying to figure out who this English patient is and what's going on with him, because he's very vague about what's happened. They don't really know like where he's from. They just call him the English patient because they don't know his name, and you get his background story as well. So this book is like a love story. It's so sad. I like sobbed when I was reading parts of this book, and poor Matthew came upstairs and was like, are you good? But no, I was not good. I was very sad. This book is beautifully written. I knew pretty much from the first couple chapters that this was going to be a favorite of the year, but I wasn't quite sure if it was, because it got to a point where I just like wasn't picking it up. And part of that is because I did Spookopolython in October, so I didn't read it at all. And then the other part of that is I didn't put it on any of my TBRs. So I like didn't need to read it, but I really, really needed to read it. I absolutely love this book. I don't know when it was published. I think not that long ago. Like the 80s maybe, the 80s or the 90s. There is a movie, all right, with Willem Dafoe, who I personally love. I saw a video of him pronouncing his own last name, or pronouncing his own name, and he said his name was William Dafoe. and it was in one of his like slates when he's much younger. So I just think it's funny that he changed it to Willem Dafoe to be more like distinct. But anyways, if you have seen that movie and you love it, let me know. I really want to watch it. Yeah, this book was so beautiful. And it was another one of those books that like, I always talk about having heard like the same story over and over again and not really liking World War II fiction. Reading from Kip's point of view, Kip is the guy who does the bomb stuff. I want to read another book about someone who does that because it was fascinating and like heart-wrenching, and every time he had to go do it, I was so scared for him. So yeah, I totally like recommend this book. I'm shocked that I loved it as much as I did, but I truly, truly loved it. So that's it. Those are the 15 books that I've read so far in the first 15 days of December. Let me know what you have read so far this month. Also, let me know what you're hoping to get to. Like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel if you have not already. I try to post 2 videos every week. I know I missed an upload recently. I'm so sorry about that. But I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!